All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Andrea Gunraj, and I work at the Canadian Women's Foundation. And I am here with the wonderful, wonderful author, Sharon Bala. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Andrea. Hi, everyone.
So you might know, I can see Sharon has already propped up her book, and I have her e-version, so I can show that on screen as well, too. As you might know, this is a bit of a CanLit conversation. We want to speak to incredible authors who are doing amazing things here in Canada to speak to just issues that interest our work. Of course, our work is interested in gender equality and all the things related to that. But what's so wonderful about Sharon and her work is that it crosses many different areas and many different kinds of intersections. So we're going to speak a little bit with her about that. Again, I'm Andrea and I'm with the Canadian Women's Foundation. And Sharon, she is, of course, dynamic. I'm really starstruck. She's author of The Boat People, which was published by Penguin Random House, coming to us from St. John's, Newfoundland. Shout out to St. John's, Newfoundland. And this is a best-selling debut. It won the 2019 Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction. It was a finalist in many different awards, and it was included in Canada Reads, Amazon Canada First Novel Award, International Dublin Literary Award 2020, which is so fantastic. And on top of that, in 2017, Sharon won the Journey Prize, and her fiction and nonfiction has been published in many different places. So Sharon, you are doing pretty well, doing good. You're really impressive, and we're just happy to have you here today. And Canadian Women's Foundation is Canada's public foundation for women and girls. We were founded in 1991, and we aim to build gender equality for all and move women and girls out of poverty, out of violence, and into confidence and leadership. You can find out more about the Canadian Women's Foundation, obviously, on our website. That's canadianwomen.org. So Sharon, we're just going to launch right into it.
Great.
We have some prepared questions. This is a very casual chat. You loosen up, you say what you want to say. We're going to go through these prepared questions, and we're also going to take some questions from our audience. And they have always very interesting things to say. So please, along the way, folks, put in your questions in the chat, and we'll pick the best ones and put it to Sharon. We have about an hour of her time, so get some doozies going, okay? So Sharon, these are unique times that we're in, and you are a writer and a storyteller. How do you find this pandemic dynamic impacting your work?
Well, for the first, I would say 3.5 weeks, I was doing not much of anything except apparently working on my dissertation on COVID-19, like everyone else, which was upsetting because right before the pandemic hit, I was deep into revising the first draft of a new novel, working toward a second draft. And I think anyone who works creatively can understand that when you're in the zone and you're like deep in the zone, it's such an amazing place to be, and then just to be completely ripped out of it is a little bit upsetting. And I found I just couldn't find that focus and that attention. I couldn't get any creativity going. But then something shifted midway through the third week. It was unsustainable to be watching the news so much. And so then I sort of did the opposite. I started to ignore the news most of the day and kind of really dove right back into this imaginary world that I was creating. And it was really the best thing. I mean, and so since then, I've actually been, like, knock on wood, incredibly productive. I got to like draft 3 of a new novel and submitted that to my agent, and I'm working on a couple of other books. So it's been an incredibly, like, the last several weeks have been incredibly productive time. And
okay, we're live again. Hello. So sorry about that, folks. Sometimes the tech fairies are not 100% with us and our video can cut out. But if you just stay set and stay where you are, we get it right back up again and we start off where we were. So Sharon, you were telling us that though you have author guilt because you seem to be more productive than other people are, you're still going through, you have a third draft of a novel that you've
Yeah.
submitted to an agent. Tell me more about that. Oh my goodness. No details, obviously, no
Yeah.
spoilers, but
Uh,
what's that feel like?
it feels really good, actually. It feels really, really good. It's a little bit ahead of what I thought was the schedule, so that's really great. But also, I'm just ready to move to the next thing, so it's good to have that off my desk. I mean, as a writer yourself, you understand that, you know, that need for space between when you finish a draft and when you come back to revise it again. You sort of need to take some space away from it so that you can see it with fresh eyes and also be more ruthless about the things that need to get cut and the things that need work, and, you know, all those new scenes you have to inevitably write, all those darlings you have to inevitably murder. Yeah.
So really, it sounds like you're pretty motivated, but do you feel inspired? Tell us what you're doing, your best tips, your best coping strategies to keep yourself inspired, fresh, doing unique and interesting things at this time that people are not feeling it.
Yeah, you know, I think like every week is a little bit different. This happens to be a pretty productive, good week for me, but last week was not so much. And I had to sort of force myself to, you know, sit down and do the work, which is easier when there's a hard deadline. And but I think, I mean, I've been saying this to my friends who are not writers as well. I think we all have to give ourselves a break in those moments, in those days, in those weeks when we just don't feel it, when we need to sleep in, and not do work or do things that are not, maybe you're working on a novel and you just don't feel it, but what you really want to do is write some poetry, then do that. um, I just think we have to give ourselves a break. And then the thing that I'm sort of learning, which is sort of ironic because I feel like for the last few years, I've tried to tell myself, okay, I need to like learn to live in the now, especially as a writer. It's so important to experience the now so that then you can bring all of those remembrances into your work. But I have terrible time doing it. I'm always thinking about the future. And now, because the future is this big question mark, it's like I'm being forced to focus on the now. Like I'm not thinking of anything really beyond what today is going to be. And in a way that can be a gift, because then I'm just focusing on the now of my work and not thinking forward. And one of the nice things actually has sort of been that there are no plans on the calendar. So if today I'm having a bad day and I'm not working well, then it's okay because there's nothing to do tomorrow except come back to the work.
Really interestingly freeing in some ways that, yeah, you don't have this kind of packed schedule. Do you find yourself, though, without the packed schedule, not necessarily having the structure that you need, or are you not particularly worried about structure issues like that?
I'm not particularly worried about structure. As a full-time writer, the days when I'm not promoting, when I'm not promoting the Boat People, then I'm either doing freelance or I'm working. So I'm pretty used to, I mean, working from home is my normal. I'm pretty used to getting up and like getting, you know, putting in the 9 to 5 days. And now that there's like, you know, my social life has just been slashed completely. And, you know, all of my other hobbies outside the house have been slashed completely. And so I'm finding myself just working all the time. And I live with an academic who's like work right now is research. So we're both just kind of working all the time.
Hi, everyone. We're back. I'm Andrea from Canadian Women's Foundation. I'm here with Sharon Bala, wonderful author of The Boat People and lots of other incredible work. Sharon just asked me, am I working on anything new? I'm also an author, not nearly as good as Sharon by any means. And I said this was my answer, because working is a strong word to describe what I'm doing. It's more like thinking about things very, very heavily. So there you go, Sharon. That's my answer.
I mean, that's what I count as work. So
okay, good. I'm so glad, because it is just all in my head, and it's too intimidating to even think about doing anything with. But I want to speak about The Boat People a little bit more, if you don't mind raising that to the camera and showing folks what that looks like. Gorgeous, gorgeous cover.
Yeah.
So evocative of what this book was. I devoured this book. I loved it so much, and it was so engaging and harrowing at the same time. And I think that might have been what you were going for. And I really was struck by the fact that it just seamlessly weaves together many different storylines. Of course, one key storyline is a father and a son who arrive in Canada as refugees on a boat. And the other storylines address the people and communities and institutional actors who interact and react with them. You wrote it in 2018, but here we're in 2020, and I still got the chills reading it all the way through, page after page. There were just so many points where it felt it spoke to what's going on today. So what thematic strings of your book would you think would particularly vibrate with readers today?
Well, one thing I've been thinking about a lot is Mahinden, and so much of the book is about this man who is stuck in limbo, right? He is in prison and he feels like the world is going on and time is moving so quickly in his mind, and yet also so slowly. And I think that's something that we're all feeling like now, right now. I think I said this a moment ago, that time has ceased to have all meaning now that we're living in this kind of uncanny version of our reality. And that is very similar to what Mahinden is experiencing. And so I hope that people who are reading this now can have even more empathy for what he and other refugees go through, because for so many of them, even if they aren't imprisoned, they're in limbo. They might be in an international displaced persons camp somewhere, or they're waiting in limbo, waiting to hear about their papers, or they arrive and they're sort of waiting in limbo to get permanent residency, and then to wait for citizenship. And you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for your new life to begin. And I think we are all waiting and waiting to find out what the post-pandemic world is going to look like. I think we all have a sense that it's not going to be exactly the same as our old world.
Right. Yeah. Sharon, you had mentioned that some folks maybe are reaching out to you more now, maybe getting time to read it. What are they telling you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So the Boat People has been out for just over 2 years, and maybe around last fall, the messages from readers had sort of trickled out and kind of came to an end, which I think is pretty normal. And then is almost as soon as we all went inside and shut our doors, I started getting messages from readers. So I think the book has been sitting on people's shelves maybe for a while, and people have a bit more time. And I know for myself, like, there are no libraries, and it takes a while for books to arrive if I order them by mail. Right. So I'm going very much to my own bookshelves and saying, what's here that I actually haven't read yet? It's time to get this like to be read pile down.
That's right. Well, this book, honestly, is a masterclass on point of view. For me, chapter to chapter, you shift, but it's just seamless, and you bring out the story from many different genders and experiences and communities. Tell us particularly how you went about doing that shift of point of view between characters and different genders.
When I first started writing, I was writing short stories, and I would work on multiple short stories at a time, and they weren't always linked. Sometimes the characters would be completely separate. And so I might be working on one short story in the morning and then a completely different one in the afternoon. So this way of working where I'm shifting back and forth and not working linearly, from chapter 1 to chapter the end is pretty normal for me. And that's actually how I like to work. And so when I was writing the 3 different strands of Mahinden and Priya and Grace, I would write their scenes one at a time and sort of out of order. And I might write a scene in in July one day, and then the next day I might jump and write a scene in November. So I was writing the whole thing out of order, and then I had all these cue cards at the end, and I was like shuffling my cue cards around and figuring out how they would go and then stitching it all together. So it was really not a big deal for me to sort of shift in my own head. And the books that I love best are the ones that have multiple points of view. And I love linked story collections that, you see the same character. You might be in one story, or in one chapter, you might be in, Mahinden's head. And then in the next, you'll be in Grace's head and you're watching Mahinden. And I'm always really interested in that dichotomy between characters who are seen and characters who are seeing. I just love that. And so as a writer, it's like very natural and fun for me to jump.
Well, considering that question of seeing and being seen, I think what is special about this story in many ways is the fact that it really speaks to how marginalized people are treated in Canada. And of course, our hearts are really heavy today with a lot of stuff around how marginalized people are treated. And we're carrying that sadness with us everywhere we go, worried about what's happening. And I think a lot of people are also questioning this treatment of people who are marginalized when it looks like we're seeing a pandemic that is very much splitting down particular lines, and people who are discriminated against are facing it very differently. So I think really what we've seen at the Canadian Women's Foundation is how women have a very unique experience, and not just women. We have to look at it in an intersectional lens, different women experiencing different things depending on their experiences and depending upon the discrimination that they face. Of course, people are calling for empathy and for living differently to center others, the idea that you have to change your behavior to impact somebody else. They're challenging this idea of a single story. So how might fiction for you and stories help us with this now?
One thing that I've been thinking about is this quote that I think everyone has sort of seen, that we're not actually in the same boat at the moment, that we're all in the same pandemic storm, but we're all in different boats. And one person's in a very comfortable yacht, and another one is like in a little rubber dinghy. And I think when we're thinking about, in some ways, we are thinking very communally, right? We're all trying to stay home as much as possible to protect not just ourselves, but everyone, the whole community. And for those of us who think we have generally good health, we're doing it for those other people who are more vulnerable, or people who are on the front lines at the grocery stores, or medical professionals who are putting themselves out there. We are all doing our part by staying home. And there's this idea that, you know, we're all in it together, we're all facing it together. We are, but we're also in our own little boats, and those boats are so different. And like one person's circumstances, like I feel really fortunate that my circumstances are that being at home is not a great hardship, right? It's not really a great hardship. If I was, I think often about my friends who have children who they're trying to homeschool while they're also working from home. I think a lot about my friends who are in small apartments in the city. I'm really feeling fortunate to be here where I can get out, and we're not, it's not so populous in Newfoundland. And usually that feels a bit sad, but right now it feels really great. So I think it's important to think about, how just because you're doing fine, someone else might not be. And when we're at the grocery store and we see, you know, the person who's brought their child, and we think, why would you bring your child? Well, maybe they haven't got childcare at home. Like, I think it's really important to sort of put ourselves out of ourselves and think about how the situation is for other people, particularly if we're having a relatively easy go of it.
If for those of you just joining, my name is Andrea. I'm with the Canadian Women's Foundation, and I'm here with the wonderful Sharon Bala, author of The Boat People. And we're just chatting about the boat people and the process of writing. And one thing that I love about the boat people is that you show how cultural narratives really impact us. And it impacts our view, who's deserving of sympathy and support and who is dangerous and unsafe. And they really transcend our individual thinking, don't they? And sometimes we can even unwittingly uphold stereotypes and discriminations that can hurt ourselves, even because their power and their source and just where they're rooted in is much bigger than us as individuals. So how do you think the most effective way is to reveal and reflect this complicated reality in fiction? It's also perhaps a controversial reality in fiction that, you know, we might very well uphold the very things that harm us, but it's bigger than us.
One of the things I was really thinking about and writing about in The Boat People was this idea that some people who are refugees themselves or immigrants themselves, they work so hard to get here or to get to the next place. And then as soon as they get in, their first reaction is like, shut the door behind me, bar the gates, don't let anyone else in. And there's this real sense of, I have to ally myself to the majority so that the majority will forget that I just got here. And the best way to do that is to keep others out. And I think it's such a perverse thing. And I don't think it's something that we talk about enough, the fact that the most vociferous anti-immigration people could be themselves immigrants. They might have accents that are not Canadian. They might look like Grace. They might look like me. And that was really something I wanted to hold a mirror up to, that kind of discrimination. That's part of what I wanted to do in the Boat People. And that's something I want to keep doing, like holding up that mirror of, I think so much about, for example, women who say, I'm not a feminist. And I just think, you don't like voting? You don't want to get paid the same as a man who does your exact same job? You don't want the freedom to choose your own life, to have birth control? You don't want those things, really? You're not a feminist? Because all it means is we want equality. And I think a real perverse thing to me is women who are anti-feminist, and women who say they're not feminists, or women who say, yeah, but I'm not one of those bra-burning feminists. I just feel like
feminism can look so many different ways. And I think it's when we get, as we talked about, that single story about how you're supposed to be. And, you know, if you don't follow these parameters, you're not who you say you are, or you're not a good whatever, right? I think you did such a good job, especially when it came to the differentiation between being a model minority and you know, a bad minority or non-model minority. I think it was so powerful. It's something, as you said, that it's rarely reflected in literature, and something that stories are talking about in CanLit, but it's often from racialized writers and writers who are maybe not coming from the center of where CanLit has been traditionally, but from the margins to the center. And it's been so powerful and exciting as a reader to see this happen. So I want to talk now about writing craft and being uniquely you. You spoke about writing women in your book. You had at least 2 women characters that are our main characters, but tons of others. What does it take to write women well?
It honestly doesn't take much. And don't you find when you read a book and a woman is so badly written that you just think, were you trying to write this badly? And also I wonder, did no women at all read this book? Like not one woman editor or copy editor or one woman friend read this book? Like just books where women are thinking a lot about their own breasts. It's such a dead giveaway. So I just think a little bit of imagination. And, you know, one thing in workshops that people ask me a lot is, how do you write outside of your own experience? Like, how can I as a writer do that? And I always say, like, you go into it with imagination, you go into it with empathy, but mostly you go into it with incredible amounts of humility. And the humility is that if I'm writing a male character, I'm thinking, I actually have no idea what it is like to be a man. And so I have to have a lot of humility around that. And so if a male reader is giving me feedback, I have to listen to that feedback and also have enough humility to do my research. And yeah, be open to feedback, but basically a little bit of imagination. Like, it's not, writing a woman character is the simplest thing.
Well, why, Sharon? Why do people have such a hard time with this?
Writing gender character is the simplest thing, right? That's just the simplest, even if it's not your gender.
Right.
Why do they have a hard time? Because they're lazy. Like, those writers are just lazy. That's it. That's it. They are lazy and they have too much hubris.
Oh, well, there you go. You don't mince words, my friend. I think that point about humility. Tell me more around that in literature. How do you move through a story with humility? What does that look like?
How do you move through a story with humility? I think it begins at so I'm working on a brand new novel and I'm at the very, very beginning, right? So the stage where I sit and stare at the grass for a long time thinking, like, that's actually work.
It's a thing.
It's real work.
Thank you.
Yes. And so right now, one of the characters I'm working on, who I think is going to be a point of view character, is a man and a Black man. And I am not a man and I am not Black. And I think the part about humility is that I'm going in with that notion of, I am not the expert in this. And if I'm going to do it, it has to be right. and I'm going to do a ton of research, which includes reading the words of Black men. Like that's a big part of it. I think when writers try to write outside of their experience, but they don't bother to read the writers who look like their characters, what are you doing? Really, what are you doing? And then you got to wonder, why do you even want to write that character? Is it because you think it's like trendy and sexy and it's going to interest an editor? Or is it because you actually want to understand the world through a different point of view?
Yeah, the hubris. I love that word. That's a great one. I think really we need to encourage this idea of going into things humbly and in a listening mode. I think a lot of people have talked about, as opposed to cultural appropriateness, I've heard the term cultural humility, and I love it because it really shows that it's not just about trying to figure out what's going to be appropriate for this person or this group of people, but more about understanding your position and what that looks like, and then where that might actually have contributed to your gaps in knowledge, and filling those gaps of knowledge, as you said, with the words and perspectives of others, I think is really, really powerful. For those of you just joining us, my name is Andrea and I'm with Canadian Women's Foundation, and I'm with Sharon Bala, author of The Boat People. So I'm going to ask you a question around themes. How do themes of gender and gender equality play a role in your work?
I think I'm a feminist, so everything I write is going to be feminist, just like everything I write is going to be like brown lady stuff, always.
Yeah.
I don't think that I think too deeply about it. Early on, one of the first kind of panel events I did was before the book was actually published. I was still working on it. But I did an event here in St. John's, and it was at a feminist women's event. And so it was myself and a couple of other writers. And this question of, how do you include feminist themes in your work came, and I still don't really have an answer for that. Because I don't think that I think about it consciously. I think it's a bit like how food always ends up in my work. It's just like an unconscious thing that's always there. I think I'm just interested in, what it's like to be a woman, and what the dangerous parts of it and the complicated parts of it and all the nuance of it. And so I think that just naturally comes out. Sorry, I still don't have a good answer for that.
No, I think when it's just like breathing, and it's just like the way you think, I don't think it's particularly complicated. I think when it's not breathing because it's not your experience per se, that's when there's maybe more steps to it. Speaking of steps, writing is obviously a multi-step process. Tons goes into the planning, the plotting, the research, the thinking before you even put your finger on a keyboard. So what would surprise people about what goes into the beginning stages of your writing?
How much ends up on the floor? It's like tons and tons and tons of stuff. I mean, scenes and scenes. So I think The Boat People is about 100,000 words. There's probably a ghost book of 100,000 words that just did not make it.
Wow.
Yeah, for me, I have to know everything about the characters. I need to write. It's almost like I need a lot of warm up before I somehow blunder my way into the parts of the book that are going to end up making the cut. So yeah, that might be one thing. And that I know a lot about the characters, way, way, way more than what is on the page.
Right. Yeah. When you have ghost books that come out of books because you just cut so much, do you ever think, let me do something with this?
It never works out. I'll give you an example. So in The Boat People, originally, one of the pieces that got cut out was that, so Priya lives at the corner of Carroll and Hastings, and I got really obsessed with that neighborhood and how it's gentrifying and how it's being made smaller and smaller and smaller. Like the original people who live there just being like, like this. And it felt to me a lot like not a lot, but like it was a parallel for me in what happens toward the end of the Sri Lankan Civil War, where the people, including Mahindan, are getting squished and squished and squished into a narrower space. And this idea of people physically on the move, I was seeing it at the corner of Carroll and Hastings. And so I had some, side stuff that was happening that had to get cut because you can't have everything. And for a while I thought, oh, I'm going to have a series of linked short stories that are all taking place in this neighborhood. And Priya won't be there. It'll just be like other people. And if anyone lives in Vancouver and remembers the pickle protest, I got really obsessed with that. And I like fell down the rabbit hole and I wrote all this stuff. And it just, I mean, there's one short story which is available if anyone wants to look at it on CanLit, which is a Penguin Random House production. Yeah. It's called Doppel, and it takes place basically where Priya lives, but in a kind of speculative fiction universe. And I got to use a little bit of that stuff there. And then there was a scene that took place from Priya's youth, like when she's 14, that got cut because it just didn't make any sense. I tried to turn it into a short story, but I don't know, I don't think it really stands on its own 2 feet. So I've sort of given up on it. Sometimes I'll cannibalize sentences.
Right. I guess it's just the casualty of the writing process, and there's not much you can do about that, right?
The writer Alex Olin said once, I heard her once say in an interview, nothing is wasted. It's all quality time that you spend with your characters. So when I do cuts, I think that now nothing is wasted.
Right. You kind of needed to move through that to get to the good stuff that you kept.
You have to know your characters, and unless you spend that time writing about them, thinking about them, you're not going to know them. And even the stuff that gets cut, it's all part of the character's story. And you knowing that, I have this like magical idea that the reader can somehow sense it, that this character is more fulsome and more rich than what is on the page.
I love the way that you're just making all these writers who are agonizing about the things that they cut, the darlings that have been eliminated, that you're making us feel really good about that. Thank you. Tell me about your writing community. You say you have an incredible writing community, and I need to know more about this community and what does and can community mean to a writer, which is often seen as a very solitary art.
Yeah. So in St. John's in particular, we have an amazing community. We have an amazing arts community, first of all, and we just have an amazing community. My washing machine broke the other day, and now they won't deliver things into your house. You have to carry the washing machine into your own house. They'll deliver it to the doorstep. And I was like, man, we need a dolly. So I just like sent out a few emails and managed to find a dolly through the community. Anyway, that's fun.
That's lovely.
The community here is amazing. It's so rich and it's so vibrant, and there's a lot of support financially, but also moral support. But also there's this great sense of we're not, I mean, of course we're all competing. Every book is competing on the shelf with every other book, but there's a great sense of this rising tide will lift us all up. And so if one writer does well, it's like I feel like we all win. And I have an amazing writing group. I miss meeting them in real life, but we had a Google Meet the other day, so that was really great. But yeah, so I have a lovely, amazing writing community here. But then what's been nice promoting the Boat People is that I've been able to travel around and meet other writers who I wouldn't have access to, and now I can keep in touch with them virtually. Of course, we're all doing that. And one thing I've been working on this year is I'm a mentor on a great program called Diaspora Dialogues, and I'm mentoring an emerging author. She's amazing. Her name is Jenica Oza, based in Toronto, and we were working together on her just completely amazing debut novel. So yeah, it's like really nice to feel like there's my community locally, but then my community across the country as well.
Awesome. So tell me about you then. How did you come to believe in yourself as a writer, and what advice would you give to the aspiring author, like maybe the one that you're mentoring right now, to believe in themselves?
I'll tell you what Lisa Moore told me the first time I met her, when I was not calling myself a writer. It was like 10 years ago at a writing festival. And she said, well, if you write, you're a writer. And that is something I say to everyone. If you write, you're a writer. And if you want to be a writer and you don't know how to do it, you just got to write. That's it. Which I admit is easier said than done. But that's really my advice, is just like, go to it.
Right. Become by doing. I think you're spot on.
Pretty much fake it till you make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, you don't get good unless you write a lot of bad garbage. Right. And I always think that every first draft I do is my garbage draft. And this is something my Canadian editor, Anita Chong, says, is the first draft's job is just to exist. It only has one job. And so if you get finished with a first draft, it's already successful.
I love that. All right, we are in our lightning round, and then we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. We've got some lovely questions from our audience, and thank you very much for sticking with us, folks. It looks like our connection is solid. Let me not say too much about that before that changes. But my name is Andrea Gunraj, and I'm with the Canadian Women's Foundation, and this is Sharon Bala, author of The Boat People, just a fabulous and award-winning book. So, flash round, questions for you. Tell us, best place to write?
In my backyard in the sun.
Yeah. Best pastime to avoid writing?
Cleaning the freezer, deep cleaning the freezer. The freezer is a disaster right now, which means I'm writing well.
Okay, fantastic. You're author to the question, why don't you get into Oprah's book club?
Who says I won't?
Ah, that's great. Author who is your rock star?
Oh, there's so many. Zadie Smith and Arundhati Roy. And one thing I really like about both of them is that they are both big thinkers. They're not just writing fiction, they're writing nonfiction. If you ever get to hear them speak, like even on the internet, they're so just huge brains.
They're brainy and wonderful. Best movie to watch that is based on a book?
I'm still waiting for it, honestly. Yeah, I feel like I always like the books better.
Spoken like a typical author.
I know.
A book you would cry about if it got stolen and you could never read it again?
I couldn't think of one. Mostly because I can't imagine not having access to a book, right?
Right. That shall never happen. I like the denial. That's great. Great title for your biography.
Please Send Mangoes, the Sharon Bala story.
I love that. And your very favorite quote?
Okay, this is one that I have on my desk, which I did a writing class with Sarah Selecki a few years ago, and she gave this to me. It's Cheryl Strayed. I'm reading it from the cue card I have. I know that if I am not feeling a little afraid, a little uncomfortable, I am not doing my work. And particularly when I was writing The Boat People, and I was writing some of the most difficult scenes that I did not want to write. And that's something that I learned between first book and second. The second book, I was much quicker about just not avoiding it, just like get to it, write the scene. Yeah.
With those difficult scenes, did you find yourself putting them off to the end? Did you have a big clump of difficult scenes to do?
I wrote several drafts without writing the difficult scenes at all. I just didn't think I needed them. It didn't even occur to me I had to write these difficult scenes. And one of the things that happened after we sold the book to McClelland and Stewart and Doubleday is my editors said, so now what happens between here and here? And what happens between here and here? And because I had done so much, staring at the grass, I knew in great detail exactly what these scenes look like. And they said, are those scenes somewhere? Like, could you send them? I was like, nope, haven't written them.
They're just in my head.
Yeah. So it was basically, it took outsiders to say, expert outsiders to say, now go and write those scenes. And in hindsight, I can see how I was avoiding them. And I think this is one of the ways that we actually procrastinate. We think we're procrastinating when we're cleaning the freezer, but actually we're procrastinating when we are writing 17 scenes that are completely unnecessary because we don't want to face the difficult scene. And we are procrastinating so well and so expertly that we don't even realize that's the scene that is needed. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so insightful. Thank you. So we are in the question and answer period of our session. We have just about 14 minutes, so a good amount of time, and some great questions have come through. This is Sharon Bala, author of The Boat People. I'm Andrea. Hi, Sharon. What books have inspired you during your career, or the books that you have read over and over?
Ooh, one author I really love is a British author named Tessa Hadley. She has an incredible way of creating characters and putting them on the page. And she gave me permission to include minute details. And by she gave me permission, I mean that I read her work and she had all these minute details about character. And those are the details I loved. And so I felt like I could do that too. So that's definitely one. Other writers are writers I've taken classes with: Lisa Moore, Sarah Selecki, Jessica Grant. And then the writers in my writing group who are incredible, who, you know, their fingerprints are just all over my stuff.
Wonderful. So the minute details, I think you are really awesome at this because you did paint a picture. A colleague of mine says she loves it when she reads something and she can smell the roti. So I think you did it. You managed that, Sharon. So here's another question then. Sarah asks, you are based in Newfoundland now, which has such a distinctive sense of place and culture. And how has living in Newfoundland influenced your writing?
Well, I wasn't really writing before I moved here, so that's one big thing. I mean, I wrote as a kid, and then I stopped. I didn't write all through my 20s, and then moved here just as I turned 30. And one big thing was I didn't have a social life here. Didn't know anybody except my husband, and he didn't grow up in St. John. He's a Newfoundlander, but he didn't grow up in St. John's. So we did not really have any friends, and the winters are very long and never ending. And in my second winter here, I got smart and I took a writing class at night. And doing that, I remembered that I loved writing. And in that class, it was with Jessica Grant, who's an amazing local writer. My craft just between day one and day last of that class just jumped hugely. And then at the end of that, I had a group of short stories. And so I started sending them out and then started writing more. And I took a couple more classes. And yeah, so that was really how I have been influenced. And I think I've been influenced by the writers here because I read their work. I hadn't read any Newfoundland authors before moving here. And so moving here, I just like very quickly gobbled up a lot of it. And that I think has imbued itself into my work. And one way is just that I think I always say, like, I come out of the Newfoundland School of Writing because this is where I learned to write. And one way you can see that is the lack of quotation marks.
Oh, is that a Newfoundland thing?
It's a Newfoundland thing. Yeah. So if you think about Michael Crummey doesn't have quotation marks. Lisa Moore doesn't have quotation marks. Elizabeth de Mariafi, who again is a CFA like me, but she doesn't have quotation like many. I think Michael Winter doesn't have any. Pretty sure Jessica Grant doesn't have any. Like, yeah, we just don't have any. And I think when I was first writing, I didn't really think about it. But then, of course, when you have good mentors and good editors, they make you account for all of your decisions. And someone actually said, why don't you have quotation marks? And I had to think about it. And then I started thinking very philosophical thoughts about quotation marks and what they mean about, this is what we do in Newfoundland. We sit around and talk about quotation marks. I'm not kidding. About what they mean for what the writer is telling you versus what the writer is leaving to your imagination. And if there are no quotation marks, then the line between direct dialogue and indirect dialogue and summary dialogue gets very blurry. And the line between spoken thoughts and interior thoughts gets blurry. And then the line between what has really been said and what is being filtered through the narrator, whether it's first person and it's unreliable, or it is the, you know, other psychic element of like a, you know, third person narrator. How reliable is that? And when you think about a scene like some of the scenes in The Boat People where you're in Grace's point of view and she's listening to testimony from people who are speaking in Tamil through the interpreter, and you as the reader are now getting it filtered through Grace, what's the story? What's true? What words are being used?
Yeah, and what holds power in that? Whose
words are they? And I wanted to put the reader in that very uncomfortable position that Grace is in, wondering.
Yes. Wow. That just got so crafty, so writing crafty. So somebody asks another writing crafty question. What's your process? Do you go to a spot to write at a certain time every day? I tend to have the sudden urge to clean out my fridge under the stove, move furniture to dust under them, When I know I have to write, and by the way, they love St. John's.
um, I mean, so yeah, sometimes the house is very, very clean. Sometimes the house is very, very clean. My ideal process on an ideal day, which is not every day, is that I get up and I don't say a word to anyone and I start writing first thing. And I do it by hand, on like a notebook and a pen. And if I can do it first thing, especially if I'm writing new material, then I feel like there's a thing that happens when you're completely awake and conscious, which is that your critical brain starts to say, that's garbage, that's garbage, that's not a good word, that's not what you mean, that's not really, that's not right. And that's a kind of terrible way to write with that critic. But we are all natural storytellers because that is what our brains do at night when we're dreaming, right? And so if you can tap into that creative, unfettered part of your brain, and I find I do that really well first thing in the morning, or when it's sort of late at night and my brain is really tired. And so the critical guy goes to sleep and like the playful, unfettered, uninhibited, dream making part of the brain wakes up and says, oh, here I am. Don't worry, just write, don't worry.
That's right. It's getting weird. Yep.
Yeah. So first thing is for me really, really good, or last thing, very late at night.
And by hand, Sharon? Did you say you do it by hand?
I do it by hand because the other thing is I find that typing is it's too easy to look for a better word, right? To like use the thesaurus function. It's too easy to delete, to cut and paste, to move around. And everything on the screen, like in a Word document, just looks too neat, which for me, when I'm first kind of barfing it out on the page, it's not going to be neat. And so if I'm handwriting, there's like a freedom to be messy, and there's a freedom to use, say, write the same line 7 times and just have all 7 versions there, or to have like, things in the margin, and like, you should see my notes. I mean, there's like arrows and like, it's a big mess, or I'll like make a note on the side, remember this for later. And there's that freedom, and again, that playfulness and that lack of like that creative jerk who's saying, that's not good, that's not good. Why would you use that word?
Yeah, what a jerk.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
That guy, I mean, that critical part is useful later when you have something to work with and you're like really fine tuning. But when for me anyway, the hardest part is just getting that first draft. So if you're like me, you're the kind of writer who has like a first draft is the hard draft, try to trick yourself into doing it.
Right. Jeanette, I think that was your question. And I hope this gave you a lot of freedom to just get it down messily. And it can be ugly and it can say things 7 times the same way. And that's okay. Sharon is giving you full permission to do that, to shut that jerk up.
Also, I tell myself, it's not really true, but I tell myself that when I'm cleaning, I'm also thinking about the character and the story.
Yes, you are. You're always thinking, even in the back of your mind, you're always going to be kind of contemplating some of the character pieces or some of the plot points that you get into holes, for sure. Another question somebody asked, I'm curious, when you started writing, did you write a lot as a kid?
Yeah, I wrote a lot as a kid and as a teenager. And then I went to university and I thought, it's not a career. I can't do that. Got to do something else. And so I put the writing aside and I did a degree, and then I did a master's, and then I worked for a while in public relations, which was a great first career and is very helpful actually for the promotion side of writing. But it was a great career because I could write. And so I told myself, well, this is how I'm writing, except of course it wasn't really the kind of writing I should have been doing. But I also think it's not a bad thing. And I'm glad that I had that first career, not only because it's helpful now, but because I think it was just helpful to be in the regular non-writing world for a while and get those experiences and then come to writing later. But I came to writing when I moved to St. John's. So that was 10 years ago now. Yeah.
Wow. I think for a decade of work, you have a lot to be proud of. Really, it's really awesome.
Thank you.
I have another question for you, and we have 4 minutes, so I hope we can ask this question and not get too difficult here. But tell me, genres. Does genre matter?
Oh, yeah, I guess. I don't know. I'll tell you the thing about genre that I think is the most helpful way to think about it, which is came to me from Elizabeth Mariafi. So let me see. Okay, picture a wheel, right? And the center of the wheel is literary fiction. And then each of the spokes is like historical and science and speculative and fantasy and, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like a continuum, right? So some books are very much literary fiction, but I would say that most books are not. Most books are somewhere on those spokes and probably actually straddle a number of spokes. So, I mean, I'll be honest, like when I found out I was up for a prize for legal fiction, my first thought was, I wrote a legal fiction? But I guess I did.
Yes, you did.
So I don't really know that these categories are helpful to anyone who's not a marketing person. And, thank goodness for marketing people. Otherwise, who would ever find your books? But I think as a writer, I would not worry too much about it. Like one of the best books I read last year is the novel Greenwood, which is just, it's everything. It's dystopian fiction and historical fiction and family saga and literary fiction, blah, 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 blah. But all you need to know is it's an amazing, engrossing, fantastically written book. So like that's my category is just like, is it a good book?
That's right. Is it good? Do you love it? Is it making you turn the pages? For sure. Well, I think The Boat People is such a great book because it can't be so easily categorized, and it has a lot of different perspectives, as we mentioned, lots of different experiences reflected, all the different kinds of angles on the same issue, and then suddenly the issue complicates itself and suddenly feels like real life. So I really just want to shout out to you, praise you, lift you up. Thank you for writing such an awesome book, The Boat People. If you can show it on your screen again, so that we can see that beautiful cover. The Boat People, that's Sharon Bala. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today.
This was so much fun, Andrea. Thank you. And thank you.
It was so fun to chat. Yeah. And I just want to take a minute, the last minute, to just wrap up and highlight the fact that the Canadian Women's Foundation, we launched a new fund called the Tireless Together Fund. It's our nationwide emergency fund in response to COVID-19. The pandemic, of course, is having an unprecedented impact on women and girls throughout Canada, and programs and services are seeing this surge in need when it comes to gender-based violence and economic problems in particular. But they're struggling to meet those needs because, as we know, there's an overarching economic issue going on right now, and lots of nonprofits are facing it. So, folks, if you would like to support the program, and if you would like to support the women directly that these programs support, I think it's important that you do so now. You can make a contribution on our website, canadianwomen.org. And I know that it's very difficult right now. So any dollar that you can spare, it helps. And we just want to thank you for that and just ask you to please stay safe, stay well. And thank you so much, Sharon. We really appreciate your work, and we appreciate your voice and for sharing with us today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.